on. Very last official sense of place of season 16. You made it. I know, it's sad. It's okay. We're going to have fun. I told our first group they were the guinea pigs to see could we get 200 people out and 200 people back in. And so far, I think you guys are doing pretty good. So yeah, maybe we'll do it again sometime. My name's Sarah Fox. I'm the host and curator of Sense of Place. And this is usually when I get really excited to tell you that we've done this for 16 years in this small town on a small budget with a small staff. I usually feel kind of smug at that point because we've done everything. But tonight I feel like a little tiny baby because we're 16 and the Crag Rats are 100. So tonight we're celebrating the 100th anniversary of the Crag Rats here in the Gorge. And the very first time that I heard about the Crag Rats was actually about 10 years ago at Sense of Place. I was in the audience then. And it was Christopher talking about the history, and I think it was the 90th anniversary. And at that time, I had been hired to produce a podcast about the Gorge, a companion podcast to Sense of Place. And the podcast was called Here in the Gorge. And we based that first season of the podcast off of topics that were at Sense of Place. And so for that first season, one of the episodes was on the Crag Rats. And so I came to the talk and I heard Christopher and I learned what this silly phrase actually meant. And then what I needed to do afterwards, which I do with anytime I'm producing a story, is you need to go find the people who know stuff and ask them lots of questions. So you can figure out what story you're going to share through a podcast or a video or in a live event like this. And so I went to some Crag Rat events, and then I was also told that I should reach out to someone named Tom Rousseau, who I'm imagining some of you guys know here. Lovely Tom. Where's Tom sitting? Where is he? Okay, Tom's right here. Hi, Tom. Remember when I invited myself over for dinner? Yeah. And I didn't even know you yet? So I invited myself over to Tom and Sandy's house because, Tom, I think, were you the big Squeak at that time? I think you probably were. So he was the big Squeak. You guys will learn more about what that is. But he was the big Squeak of the Crag Rats. And I went over there. Basically, what I needed to do was, if I was going to produce an audio story about the Crag Rats, I needed to know what potential stories were out there. And so I rolled up to Tom and Sandy's house kind of expecting that he would share sort of those classic mountain rescue stories of someone on the side of a cliff and someone on the summit of Mount Hood and epic mountain climbing people. And when I asked him, what's the rescue that stands out, he got really quiet, as Tom does. And he said, the one that I really remember was about a 10-year-old little boy. And I said, okay, tell me more. And he said, this 10-year-old little boy, Cole, had been wanting to go see snow in the summer, which because of where we live, you can actually do. And so Cole and his father, Kim, had been planning for weeks to go on a father-son camping trip, their first father-son camping trip together, and they were going to go to Mount Hood. Alex, do you mind pulling up the photo of Cole? So that's Cole there. So Cole was so pumped. It was his first father-son camping trip. He was going to get to go to Mount Hood and see snow in the summer, and they practiced, and they prepared, and they did all this stuff to be safe in the outdoors. They did everything right. And they got to the mountain, and they set up camp, and the sun was just starting to set, and Cole wanted to get up a little higher to see the sunset. And so his dad and him hiked up the scree field. And as the sun started to get kind of close to the horizon line, his dad, Kim, said, we should probably head down before it gets too dark. And so Cole, as 10-year-old boys sometimes do, started down the hill, but maybe a little bit faster than he should have. And the next thing he knew, he was tumbling head over heel down the hill. And Tom shared this story, and I really appreciated it because it reminded me that so many of the rescues and the work that the Crag Rats do isn't for crazy mountaineers doing things that most of us would never do. A lot of the work they do is for people just like us who are just out for a hike or out for a swim in a creek or anything. and it can happen to all of us. And so that story of Cole and Kim stuck with me, and you're going to hear a little bit more about that before the end of the night. Before we get to Christopher, I want to just take a second and thank our sponsors. Sense of Place gets about half of their funding from people and businesses and nonprofits who step up every year, many for the past 16 years, which is really incredible. And I love that I don't have to spend a huge portion of my time hustling for money, so I can spend more of my time hustling for awesome people like Christopher and the other speakers we've had this season. And so to those of you in the audience who are sponsors and who have been sponsors for so many years, thank you so much. It really, truly, in a program this size and a place this size, you can have an impact and see that impact play out in everyone else, because we've had 400 people here tonight, and this will go into our archive, and I just know, looking at the other episodes in our archive, thousands more tune in to learn about what's getting shared at Sense of Place, and to me, that is a really incredible thing. So thank you to our season 16 sponsors. Christopher, I always feel like we all kind of know each other, but I know that's not necessarily the case, but I would imagine a lot of you guys know Christopher. He is many things, but for tonight, what's really important to know is he has been volunteering with the Crag Rats for 25 years, more than 25 years. And in addition to his work with the Crag Rats, he's a physician with a specialty in emergency and wilderness medicine. We were just talking backstage when it was COVID time, and I was trying to decide, could we get back in the theater safely? Christopher was the one I could call and say, what do you think? How's it look? And unfortunately, he was risk averse in probably all the right ways. But he was good to keep taking my call. So tonight, he's going to help us reflect on a century of this incredible group of people who have served this place and its people. Please help me welcome Christopher Van Tilburg to Sense of Place.
Thanks so much. Thanks, Sarah, for having me here as part of Sense of Place. Thanks for being such a great community. This story starts back in 1926, 100 years ago. And this is a letter that went out by Andy Anderson. Can you turn the lights down maybe a little bit? This went out in 1926. There was a group of mountaineers in Hood River, the Hood River Guides. They were guiding on Mount Hood, leading people up to the summit on the north side. The north side was very accessible from Hood River compared to the south side, so you could get to Hood River from Portland by train or ferry or car. And the Hood River Guides started doing some rescues. In 1924, they pulled somebody out of the Crag Glacier. 1924, they went after a lost boy up at Lost Lake, and they decided to form a rescue group. And they didn't really settle on a name. You can see there's a couple names. They were throwing out the mountain goats. They were throwing out the Crag Rats. They were already the Hood River Guides, so they didn't really decide a name. But as soon as they formed this group, literally a week or two later, they got pulled on a mission. Their first formal mission was on the south side of Mount Hood over by Welch's. There was a missing 11-year-old boy. Somebody over there remembered there was this group of Hood River mountaineers that were doing rescues. And they called them, and the group went up to the Alpine, spent the night above present-day Paradise Park, which is just north of Timberline Lodge. And the next morning, they found the boy. And they brought him down to Welch's, and there was a lot of media attention. The kid was missing for 3 days. There's a lot of media attention. And the oral history and the written history from the Crag Rats differs a little bit, but who it was either Mace Baldwin or Percy Buckland. And they brought the boy out, and one of the reporters said, "Who are you guys?" And the mountaineer remembered one of the wives saying, "You're shirking your household duties every weekend. You're a bunch of rats for climbing crags. That's all you do." So he blurted out, "We're Crag Rats." So that's basically who we are. And so we formed a mountain rescue team. And this is what we look like in the 1920s. We were a group of skiers and climbers. And if reading the meeting minutes from those days, I kind of realized that they weren't that different from us, outdoor enthusiasts, adrenaline junkies, but they didn't have wing foiling and gravel biking, skate skiing. They had basically skiing and climbing. And skiing back then was basically backcountry skiing. That's what skiing was. There was just some beginnings of some rope tows in the 20s, and the early chairlifts were in the 30s. And so they skied and they climbed. Some weekends, they would have a group of 5 or 6 going to Mount St. Helens and another group of 5 or 6 going to Three Finger Jack. So just all the time. And you'll notice something in these early pictures. They're wearing black and white, 1-inch buffalo checked shirts. Wool, they bought them from Woolrich. They're Woolrich brand. They bought them from Montgomery Ward's in Portland for $2.85. And these are the old school wool. This one I'm wearing, like it's itchy. My neck itches. I haven't washed it. I'm afraid to wash it because everybody washes their shrinks. It's got some stains on it. I've slept in it at least 4 times. And when I first joined the Crag Rats in 2000, I was like, all these other groups have like bright color logo jackets, and we gotta buy a wool shirt. And I couldn't find it. My first one was cotton because they didn't make them, and then I found this one, I think, used. But then I realized, it took me a number of years to realize that this is sort of the fabric that holds our team together, and it's the important piece of our culture that we have this bond. So when we do high stakes missions in austere conditions, middle of the night in a storm, we have some kind of connection and some kind of camaraderie, and that's what these shirts really symbolize for us. And so the Crag Rats formed a mountain rescue team, first one in the nation. I found only 4 other teams that predated the Crag Rats in the world. 3 were in the Alps and 1 was in Hong Kong. But we were probably the 5th in the world, but the only one in North America at the time, a mountain rescue team. And this is guiding on Mount Hood with the American Legion. We guided the American Legion up to the summit of Mount Hood for about 20 years as the Crag Rats. I think one of the last missions was around 1947, or one of the last climbs. This is early 40s, I think. Well, those are alpenstocks, and that's the summit cabin on Mount Hood. So alpenstocks are what they used to climb mountains before the invention of the ice axe. They used hemp rope from the orchards. They used orchard boots with hobnails pounded in the bottom for traction, and climbed all the time. This is one of the early rescues. That's Calvin White. He was missing on January 1st, 1927. He was climbing with a bunch of friends and got lost, and somebody called the Crag Rats, and they came around to the south side of the mountain, present-day Timberline Lodge up there. Up at the time was just a ranger cabin at present-day Timberline. And they sent the Crag Rats up into the Alpine. They stayed the night, and then they found the boy the next morning. And they got him across the zigzag by 2 Crag Rats bent over on their backs, and they slid the litter across the backs to get across the zigzag. And when I read the news reports from this mission, it was the Daily Oregonian and the Oregon Journal, I think. The news reports described this mission. It got a lot of press. It described this mission as this harrowing mission, stormy weather. 5 Crag Rats slept overnight in the mountains with 1 blanket. They had a fire that kept sinking into the snow and eventually went out. They almost got hypothermia. They almost died. They found the boy. They forded the river. It was a fairly elaborate and dangerous mission. And then when I went to the Crag Rat meeting minutes for the same mission, it was like 2 sentences. They said, "We spent the night and it was interesting." That's literally what they said. They said, "We had to keep elbowing Hukari to keep him awake because he was falling asleep, and we were afraid he'd die of hypothermia." And these guys were just, they were just badass mountaineers, and they were skilled, and they were joking with each other, and that's who they were. And this is some early press. This is in the New York Times, 1931. They called the Crag Rats cosmopolitan. And we are still cosmopolitan today. So we have people come to the Crag Rats. We have a really strong medical contingent. We have a strong professional ski patrol contingent. But we also have solid rescue mountaineers who are orchardists and lawyers and school teachers, farmers, carpenters. And so people come from all different backgrounds. And the things that bring us together are this love for the high alpine, the passion for the mountains, and the desire to get out of bed at night and go ski up into a storm. And so this is from Popular Science and Mechanics, 1934, I think, a story about the Crag Rats. And this is also 1934, Stuart Holbrook in American Forest. And he writes here about how to be a Crag Rat, you have to have climbed to climb Mount Hood and Mount Adams. And we have these sometimes wonky traditions, and including the shirt, which I've already talked about. We don't have a president. We have a big squeak. We don't have a secretary. We have a pipsqueak. And one of the traditions is to be a member, you have to climb Mount Hood and Mount Adams, and that's a tradition we hold on to pretty tightly. We've had people come to the Crag Rats who've guided on Aconcagua. They've got triple-digit summits of Rainier. They've climbed Denali. And we're like, nope, you got to climb our two mountains. And that's the way it is. And, part of it is making sure somebody has the skill to get up a mountain. But the other part of it is to make sure that people who join the Crag Rats have a connection to the local community, and that they're not going to join and then zip out of here. They're going to join, and they're going to be a part of the community and participate. And that's part of it. And so if you ask me today, like, what does it take to be a Crag Rat? Well, I'm going to paraphrase my friend and my Crag Rat colleague, Gary Slay. He said, we can teach the rescue skills. We can teach people our 3-to-1 rope system, our hypothermia wrap. We can teach how to use CalTopo in professional search mode. Those skills we can teach, but we can't teach people to be alpinists. We can't teach you how to have a love of the alpine. We can't teach you to have a desire to get out of bed in the middle of the night or at 4 a.m, put on your gear and ski uphill into a storm. So those are really what it takes to be a Crag Rat, is those qualities. And it's hard to get in. It's really hard to get in to be a Crag Rat. And part of that I didn't really understand in my early days as a Crag Rat. I thought, we should just be letting people in. And then I kind of understood, from my other friend, Asa Mueller, is a Crag Rat, who told me once, he said, I have to know who's at the end of my rope. So if we're at 10,000 feet on Mount Hood and we got to lower somebody into a fumarole, and it's 2 a.m. and it's stormy, we have to know who's behind us and who's got the end of the rope. And so that's really important. So the Crag Rats were kind of busy in the 20s and in the 30s, and then the war happened. So the 40s, everything kind of shut down. Recreation kind of shut down. From 1940 to 1956, there were only 2 missions in the Alpine. And when I first was looking at the archives of the Crag Rats, and I noticed that, I was like, wow, the Crag Rats weren't very busy. And I asked one of my colleagues, I'm pretty sure it was Rick Reagan, is kind of a mentor and a long-term Crag Rat, and he said, we didn't have very many missions in those days, 40s through the 70s, but because we climbed all the time and we walked up and down the mountain, we knew the mountain, we know rope work, we know how to haul people out of the crevasses, that when we did have a mission, we just executed it expertly. And when I looked at some of the mission reports from those days, sounds like just a walk in the park. 12 Crag Rats show up, they run up the mountain, they rig up a anchor, they drop a rope, they send somebody down the crevasse, they haul somebody out, they get them out, and it's done. And so it really was this constant climbing and walking in the Alpine and walking on glaciers that really made these people back then experts at what they did. And here's an example. This is a social outing, snowcat skiing in the late 40s. This is an early rescue from probably the 40s or the 50s. We still use a version of that toboggan that you see there. We have a version now that's carbon fiber and weighs 23 pounds and costs $5,000. But we use basically that same, a modern version of that sled. Now, when the Crag Rats, because we weren't incredibly busy those years, 40s, 50s, 60s, maybe 8 to 10 missions a year, couple missions in the Alpine every decade, we volunteered elsewhere in the community because this is kind of the type of people that the Crag Rats are. For a while, we were wildland firefighters, a couple seasons for the Forest Service. One summer, there was a heat wave in Hood River in the 50s, and the sheriff asked us to be lifeguards at Coburg Beach. So for a week, we were lifeguards at Coburg Beach. After the war in the 50s, the sort of Cold War was kind of brewing, and the sheriff was worried that there would be an atomic bomb on Portland, and all the Portlanders would run to Hood River. That's scary, right? So the sheriff deputized the Crag Rats, and we were law enforcement officers for a couple of years. But the thing we did most, the aspect of the community participation that we did the most outside of mountain rescue was this. This is the snow surveys. We did this for 4 decades. So in the 40s, we started working for the Soil and Water Conservation District, in charge of sort of gauging the irrigation water and how to fill the reservoirs and how much water there'd be for the orchard community that was thriving in Hood River. And so we'd ski up into the mountains with these 4-foot tubes, assemble them, measure the depth of the snowpack, fill the tubes with snow, weigh them to gauge water content of the snow, and kind of report back to the conservation district. And so we did this. There are some years where every single weekend in the winter there was a snow survey. So they did them on Greenpoint, which is Kingsley. There was a cabin there that's gone. They did them on Red Hill, which is up by Vista Ridge, Lost Lake. There's a cabin up there that's gone. So they would ski up, spend the night, do the snow survey, complain about each other's coffee, and ski home. And they would do them up at Tilly Jane Cloud Cap Historic District. So if you're not familiar with Tilly Jane, it's a historic district at 6,000 feet on the north side of Mount Hood, accessible by road only from about Memorial Day to late October. Most of the time it's only accessible by skis or snowshoes or snowcat or snowmobile. And so the Crag Rats would do snow surveys up there, and they would ski up and for a while they used a building called the Tilly Jane A-frame, and then for a while they used the Tilly Jane Guard Station. Both of those at the time were owned by the Forest Service and still are. And then they started using this building. And this building, if you're not familiar with it, this is Cloud Cap Inn. And it was built in 1889 as a bed and breakfast. It's kind of failed as a bed and breakfast. It changed hands a bunch of times. And the Forest Service got it in 1940, and then immediately the war years just left it in disrepair. The roof was fallen in, the glass was broken, the textiles were chewed up by mice. And from what I can tell, in 1948, 1949, the Crag Rats just sort of moved in without permission. Like they just moved in and they just claimed it and they started fixing it up. And then they negotiated over the course of several years with the Forest Service, and the first lease I could find was 1955. So we executed a lease with the Forest Service, and we've had it ever since. And so this building, we use it for rescues on the north side. We have a full cache of state-of-the-art rescue and medical equipment at this building right now. And so we use it for rescues, we use it for trainings, and we use it for a very important part of our group, social outings. It's really, and it seems like we're just using it for social stuff, but it's really important that we get to know each other, we get to know our quirks, and we make fun of each other, and we tease each other. And it's important that we have this camaraderie and this bond so that when we operate in high-stakes missions, we feel comfortable with who we're working with. And so this is Cloud Cap Inn today. And so this picture is taken right after we put on a new roof, which largely was in part because of you all. So we had a roof fundraising campaign a couple of years ago, and many people in the community helped us put this roof on. It was incredibly expensive because we had to get shakes, cedar shakes from Canada because they had to be 36 inches long because it's a historic building, and nobody in the United States makes those. So we put on a new roof, and we use it. We use it fairly frequently in the winter and in the summer. In this building in 1955, there was a couple other things that happened. At that time, the Crag Rats weren't super busy in the war years, and then by 1955, recreation was booming again, but the Crag Rats didn't really get busier because there were a lot of other rescue teams. There were rescue teams in California, Oregon, all over Oregon, Bend, Portland. There's a strong Washington contingent, a very famous mountain rescue group up in Washington. And so there were other teams doing rescues. And so in 1955, the Oregon teams got together here at Cloud Cap and formed Moresco, the Mountain Rescue and Safety Council of Oregon. And it was a council of all the Oregon teams to foster camaraderie and share ideas. In fact, for about a decade, all of the missions in the Alpine, all of the Moresco teams got called. So there would be rescues with people that would come from Hood River and Portland and Bend, and they'd all converge on rescues in the Alpine on Mount Hood. And so a few years went by, and there was a need for a national organization. So the Washington teams, Oregon, California, Colorado, and a couple teams from the U.S. military got together in 1959 and formed the Mountain Rescue Association, a national, actually North American organization, because Canada is part of the Mountain Rescue Association. And this is the very first meeting of the MRA, and this is at Timberline Lodge in 1959. Dick Pooley was the first president. He was a Crag Rat. And this is still a really important part of the Crag Rats today, because the Mountain Rescue Association is who credentials us in crevasse rescue, cliff rescue, and avalanche rescue. And so we get credentialed, we get tested, and this is an important agency that does that, the Mountain Rescue Association. And these are pictures from the early days. Sometimes the rookies get out of line, and apparently this is what happens. I'm pretty sure our technique is different today than it was in this picture. We don't do this technique anymore. So the 60s and the 70s were busy for the Crag Rats with social outings, with climbing and skiing and snow surveys. Not so much rescues. We still did rescues, but there weren't a huge amount. There was a new area that we did rescues in, and that's the Columbia Gorge National Scenic Area. We started doing more trail rescues. This picture is from 1974. This is from famous Oregonian outdoor photographer David Falconer, who was an honorary member of the Crag Rats. And this is a snow survey, and you can kind of see the pipe there that they would fill with snow and weigh it to gauge water content. And this was the last snow survey that was ever done by the Crag Rats after 4 decades. This is Jerry Bryan wearing his itchy wool shirt, and he's doing the last snow survey. And at this time, the snow surveys had already been taken over by telecom. And so telemetry is how snow surveys are done today. We have the system that does this job is called SnowTel, and it's electronic sensor, and it's a pad and a scale, and it weighs the snow and measures the depth and sends the information. And so that's the last snow survey. But, the Crag Rats kept climbing. This is on the north side, Mount St. Helens and Mount Adams in the background there. This is really one of my favorite pictures of this whole talk. This is a winter outing many years ago. This is Lefty Levens. He passed away 2 years ago, still a Crag Rat. So this is a little cautionary tale. Those people are interested in joining the Crag Rats, because you will never get out. If you join, you're in for life. And so this was Mount Hood Meadows Ski Resort opening season, 1968. Crag Rats were instrumental in getting the ski resort up and running. And for a while, 8 or 10 years, there was a 4th snow survey site. So I mentioned we did them at Greenpoint, Red Hill, and Tilly Jane. They started doing them in Mount Hood Meadows snow surveys, and I'm pretty sure it was just so they could go skiing for free. I don't think they really needed any data, but they were doing snow surveys at Mount Hood Meadows. This is a crevasse rescue training that was done for KGW News in the mid-'70s. This was a recovery of an airplane motor 4 days before this. The Crag Rats recovered the deceased pilot. This is, I think, up on Cooper Spur. And the meeting minutes of this mission, there was 1 or 2 sentences about the recovery of the motor, and there were like 3 paragraphs about this propeller. They were arguing over it like siblings. Somebody wanted to take it up to Cloud Cap. Somebody wanted to take it out to the hut. Somebody thought they had to take it home. Somebody thought they had to mount it on the wall. There was just this banter back and forth. And I realized something when I was researching this. If you take these meeting minutes from the 50s or 60s and you just white out the date, you would think it happened last week. In the 1950s, there was a very intense discussion in the meeting minutes of the Crag Rats about who was responsible for not bringing enough beer to the winter outing. And there was some anger, I could tell from reading the words. And I'm not joking. 2 weeks ago, I got an email from the Crag Rats. Somebody was responsible for letting the keg go dry at the hut. So same stuff, just different decade. Okay, then this guy shows up, 1973. So he's 18 years old in this picture, and on the right here is his application for membership. And we think that he's done more rescues on Mount Hood than anybody ever alive or dead. And when we see the name, I'm speaking for a lot of rescuers, when we see the name come across the text message that Brian Hukari is coming to the rescue, we all kind of have a sense of, relief and reassurance, because Brian's been doing mountain rescue for well over half his life, and we'll do these missions at these obscure places that nobody's ever been to, like Gleason Creek on Mount Hood. And we get way up in there, and Brian's like, oh, yeah, we were here 20 years ago, and we brought the guy down, and we can just do it the same way. Like this wealth of knowledge of the mountain. And so this is Brian Hukari. And reading the rosters of Crag Rats during this time, the 70s and 80s, there's something that really stood out, in that we started having second and third generation Crag Rats. So that some of the rosters in the 70s and 80s, there'd be like a dozen Anolas, a whole squad of Hukaris, a bunch of Wellses, a bunch of Shepherds. And it was actually the odd thing when I was reading the roster that there would be somebody's name and it wasn't associated with anybody else. And so we just had this multi-generational vibe of people joining and families participating in the Crag Rats. So I want to talk a little bit about what we do today. We weren't incredibly busy in the 70s, 80s, 90s. We had maybe each decade we had probably a half dozen missions in the Alpine and a number of missions in the Columbia River Gorge and in Hood River. We went over to Klickitat County somewhat regularly for mushroom hunters and huckleberry pickers that got lost. Went after airplanes. One crashed in the Simcoes, Goldendale. A couple have crashed on Mount Adams. One crashed on Mount Hood, which I already showed you. So, but it wasn't incredibly busy during this time. And when I joined the Crag Rats in 2000, in addition to complaining about the stinky wool shirt, my second mission ever, somebody called me, I think it was Penny Hunting, who was our coordinator at the time, called me on the phone because we didn't have any other way to communicate. And she said, you need to go to the rescue, but you got to go to McCurdy's barn and get all our gear. And so I don't know where McCurdy's barn is, but she told me where it was. I go there, I open it, it's dark. I put the entire total of the Crag Rats equipment in the back of my Suburban. and drive to the mission. And it's a litter and a bunch of ropes and some oxygen bottles. And we did the mission and it turned out okay. But we didn't have radios, we didn't have team vehicles. And so we kind of were plugging along. We had this just incredibly strong social connection and this social vibe, and we had this camaraderie, and we spent a lot of time together in the mountains, but not a ton of missions. And then something happened to us in 2013. And it was fairly significant. So 2013, after 4 decades of most 10 missions a year, we had 30 missions in 2013. That took us by surprise. And we had to do something about that. We had to address the problem. We had to address the equipment issue and the personnel issue and the vehicle issue and the radio issue. And I took this picture 10 years later. This is on January 1st of 2024. And that's Brian Hukari on the far left there. And I took this picture. I really like this picture because we put this climb together about 1 day before it happened, and we got to the summit of Mount Hood, and I kind of realized that this sort of bookmarked the end of this decade that we spent kind of building our team up to a mountain rescue team. And we sort of made this slow metamorphosis from a strong social club that was an expert mountain rescue group to a professional level mountain rescue team that had a strong social vibe. And we made this transition, and we didn't have spreadsheets, we didn't have a bunch of committees, we didn't make a bunch of lists, we didn't have meetings. We had this kind of unique situation where everybody just stepped up and took care of something. And so, for example, we had some professional ski patrollers join, and they taught us how to use the Akia, and they brought our avalanche rescue skills up to a professional level. We had this guy who joined who was an oscilloscope engineer from Tektronix, and he totally put our radio program together. He built a repeater, then he built another repeater, then he built a third repeater and drove it up and installed on a Mount Defiance, so we'd have radio communications in the county. And that's Tom Rousseau, he's sitting right over there. We had a good friend of mine, Gary Soleil, who said our rope situation needs to be fixed. And so he spent the better part of 4 or 5 years gathering all the Crag Rats who had the best rope knowledge, guides, ski patrollers, and he put together a rope program that was slimmed down, efficient, effective, cataloged, and we now have just like a professional grade rope rescue program. And so I helped, of course, do medical upgrade, and so in those years we brought our basic first aid level up to emergency medical responder and got licensed as a non-transport EMS team. And so everybody just stepped up and we did it. And this is like bookended that decade of putting that program together. And so now I'm gonna show you kind of what we do. And all these pictures have been released to the public by the sheriff's offices, but this is what we do now. This is on the old chute. This is a common occurrence that people get stuck somewhere and they can't get down. So stuck on the summit of Mount Hood because of equipment failure and can't get down. People get stuck in Eagle Creek, they get stuck in the creek, they get stuck on a cliff, they get stuck on a waterfall and they can't get down. They get stuck on the scree fields on Benson Plateau because the trails up there aren't very well defined, and so we go after people who get stuck. We go after trauma patients. So this is a very common occurrence where people fall on Mount Hood and get hurt. And this is the bottom of the old chute on Mount Hood at about 10,000 feet. This is the Hot Rocks fumarole. And so there's a couple of us down there with the patient, and there's a rescuer from the Army National Guard. This is a hoist. They're gonna hoist the person up into the helicopter. Of the last couple missions we've done, the Army National Guard has landed on the Hog's Back at 10,000 feet. The skids of the helicopter sink and the belly rests on the snow, and we can load the patient directly in the helicopter, sort of hot load them, and it's very quick. And we've been doing that lately instead of this hoist. This hoist takes a bit of time, and it's somewhat dangerous. And this was one May, I think in 2018. And then you'd think, this is in the exact same place, exact same situation. You'd think it's the exact same rescue, but it's 6 days later. Same thing all over again. This is it's a helicopter mission for a person who's injured in the same place, fell off the Mount Hood. And there's really a couple things going on here. You're only gonna see a glimpse of it. There's this helicopter hoist that we're trying to do, but we never really put all of our reliance in a helicopter, because if you look closely, this helicopter's shifting in the wind, and we've been in situations here where the helicopter's been called off. So we have an entire team of Crag Rats with our colleagues from Portland Mountain Rescue preparing a rope raise, followed by a ski down to Timberline Lodge. And you'll see them here in a minute. You can see a few people up top, way up there, but there's like probably 20 people up there getting ready for a raise. We do about a quarter to a third of our missions occur either totally at night or in part at night. So on the left here is a funeral mission. That picture is from about 2 in the morning. Somebody fell into a funeral. On the right here is somebody who got stuck without snowshoes a mile or 2 from his car on Bennett Pass, and we found him and warmed him up and brought him out. We do train pretty heavily on avalanche rescue. We haven't had an avalanche injury in a couple of years on Mount Hood. This is a very popular ski destination, Illumination Saddle, and this is actually avalanche came off Hawkins Ridge there and took a 90-degree turn. You can kind of see way up there in the picture, the avalanche kind of turned. We go after a fair number of people who are lost, and this is a mission where we didn't find that person for about a year. And this is, searching in the woods. This is a common occurrence on Mount Hood. This is a whiteout. This is in Newton Canyon with 2 of my friends who are Crag Rats, Meredith and Ron. And there's a little tiny slough there in the middle. But this is a sunny day in May, or not May, I think it was probably April, sunny day, pretty clear. And then there was a lenticular cloud that came in and formed this fog. So, Mount Hood is a stratovolcano, 11,235 feet high, but its prominence is 7,000 feet. So that means it sticks above the forest 7,000 feet. So when the cool air comes in off the Pacific Ocean over the forest and then hits the cold snow, it condenses and forms a fog or a lenticular cloud. And so this happens somewhat frequently on Mount Hood. When it happens on the south side, we call this the Mount Hood Triangle. So I'm at 10,000 feet taking this picture. This is at Devil's Kitchen. That's Mount Jefferson in the background. That's White River Glacier on the left and Timberline Lodge on the right. So zoom in here. That's the Timberline Lodge ski area, Palmer, chairlift, and that's Timberline Lodge parking lot down there. And so if I'm standing here and there's a whiteout, and we had 2 missions of this exact same occurrence last year. We haven't had any yet this year, but every year somebody's standing at Devil's Kitchen at 10,000 feet. It's a whiteout. If you walk straight downhill, which is what we kind of want to do, down the fall line, you're going to end up over Mississippi Head Cliff into the zigzag drainage. And it's a cone. Volcanoes are cones. So if you're only off by 2 degrees, as you go down, you get farther and farther away from your car. And so, if you're in the Mount Hood Triangle, you have to know to either follow magnetic south on your compass to get back to Timberline Lodge, which is kind of weird because it's kind of a side hill and you got to go over a little hump. And you're doing this in a whiteout. It's really strange feeling. Or you can just go straight down the fall line to 8,300 feet and take a sharp left and traverse over to the ski area. But you have to know those 2 routes or you're going to end up in the zigzag drainage. Some years, maybe up to 30% of our missions are in the Columbia River Gorge. And if you'll hear maybe in the news about us doing a Columbia River Gorge mission. Some of them, if they're on the trail and we can bring a litter up with a wheel on it, it's fairly straightforward. But a lot of times we might be, like on the right here, we're only like a mile from pavement in our truck, but it's really, really rugged terrain and it's somewhat dangerous. And especially after the fire from 2016, there's a lot of hazards in the Columbia River Gorge trails, and so they are challenging to do missions on. At least once a year, we respond to a body recovery, at least once a year. So this is on the north side of Mount Hood, doing a technical raise to get a deceased person out of a serac field or crevasse field. And this is in conjunction with our colleagues, Portland Mountain Rescue. We'll pretty much go wherever people ask us to go. But we only deploy with the permission of the Hood River County Sheriff. So we have an incredibly positive relationship with Matt English. He's incredibly supportive of us, and we work in collaboration and under the sheriff. So if we get deployed, we have to be deployed by the sheriff. So, just last year we were called by somebody who said, hey, my dog fell off the cliff of West Cliff Drive. Can the Crag Rats come get it? And we're like, sure, call the sheriff, get us deployed. And this mission was a situation on Mount St. Helens when there was a missing person. They had no alpine teams. They needed a couple ski mountaineers to ski to the summit. So Ron, Martin, and I skied up to the summit, and we found the deceased on the summit, and they had a helicopter to bring off the body from the summit of Mount St. Helens. And we were up there, and we had the body loaded, and Ron was like, I think we should ski down. And it was 4 p.m. It was May, really warm, and there was 8 inches of thick slush. And I was like, Ron, I don't think we should ski down. I think we should get a ride down. So we got a ride down. So that's the mission I think of as reverse heli skiing. So we climbed all the way to the top, and we got a ride down. So go figure. Every year we take our medical committee up to Mount Rainier, and this is Coley Wiseman, who's sitting right over there, giving a lecture to the climbing rangers. So there's a patrol system a volunteer mountain rescue patrol up at Mount Rainier for all the Washington teams, and we go up and take a weekend, and we do patrol, we ski with a radio, we stay in a park service cabin, we do EMS training for the park rangers for about an hour or two, and give them an update on, I think we gave hypothermia, avalanche, and patient assessment. And then once in a while, we get pinged on a rescue. 2019, we were sitting around drinking beers after skiing all day in this cabin in Longmire, and we hear an all-call, any mountain rescue team available. And we go up, and we show up at Paradise. It's like 8 o'clock at night, and there's a district ranger there and a climbing ranger and a couple other people, and they're like, who are you guys? We don't know you guys. You're wearing these black and white shirts. We might use you. And then we start pulling our gear out, and they're like, oh, you've got skis, you got rescue gear. Okay, we're gonna send you with the ranger up to get the 3 people. We got them off the Muir Snowfield and off Panorama Point. This is a little, belay station that I set up. We brought them all down. And we get back to the parking lot at like midnight or later, and the district ranger says, so, I didn't really know who you guys were. I called Washington Emergency Management. They'd never heard of any Crag Rat, and they thought we were some dirtbag climbing group. So Washington calls Oregon Emergency Management, and they're like, oh, I know these guys. And so they transfer the call to the small town in Oregon, Hood River, and they're like, yeah, these are our guys. They're okay. You can have them participate on the rescue. Of course, that was after the rescue was already done. So I went home, and I looked up in the archives when the last Crag Rat mission was on Mount Rainier, and it was in 1929. They went up to Mount Rainier to help get a ranger. Forrest Greathouse was deceased in a crevasse, and they helped. They drove up from Hood River, did the mission, and drove home, and it was all done in like 30 hours. But anyway, so that's our Mount Rainier. And so one year we went up to Olympic National Park. This is like day 7 of a missing shed hunter, and all the Washington mountain rescue teams were tapped out. The ground teams were tapped out. People had to go back to work, back to families. So we went up there and stayed a couple nights in the Lake Quinault Lodge and searched for a couple days. We walked up this creek and rappelled off. Cliff is like 40-foot rappels, looking down, back up, and searched this creek. And if you, by now, hopefully you kind of understand why we do this, but if you don't, we have this love for the alpine, and we have this desire to help people. But if you can imagine going to these beautiful places with all your best friends and laughing and complaining about each other's coffee and arguing about who gets the bed in the Lake Quinault Lodge and who gets the floor, like these are really important moments of humanity, and it's just why we go out and walk around in the woods. So what's going to happen in the next 100 years? And I'm not sure. We have brought our avalanche rescue skills up. We've brought our rope rescue skills up. We've brought our medical skills up. May 1st, I believe, we're going to go live with an advanced life support team for the Crag Rats with 9 members. But we're going to continue to have new challenges and new rescues. Part of it, I think, is because there's just more people in the world. When I was graduated from high school, we had 4 billion people in the world. Now we have 8 billion and growing. This is what used to be the most climbed route on the most climbed glaciated peak in the world. This is the Pearly Gates on Mount Hood. This is really never came in this year and kind of didn't come in last year. So now most people are climbing Old Chute, 1 o'clock and 2 o'clock couloirs. But this is from a couple years ago, and these are one-way chutes. So you can't pass in them. They're about as wide as my shoulders. You need 2 ice tools. They're like a ship's ladder steep. And most years, there's a 4-foot ice wall that you got to get over. And if somebody freezes or gets stuck or has crampon failures in the middle, like nobody's getting up or down. And so it's just really crowded on the mountain nowadays. This is Mount St. Helens. A lot of people on Mount St. Helens. This is, pretty low impact because it's skiers on snow. They're not doing a lot of harm. And I kind of like the fact that there's all these people out in the wilderness and appreciating the wilderness and getting to know it. But at the same time, it makes the Crag Rats really, really busy. So I mentioned in 2013, we went to 30 missions. We didn't stay there very long. We went right up to 45 missions for about a decade. In 2022, we had 60 days of deploying. In 2025, we had 54. So more than one a week, all for about 45 rescuers. So there's more people, so we're gonna have more missions. The way people interact with the mountains is different now. You think? So I was skiing on Mount Hood this day, and I saw this guy in the parking lot celebrating. I was like, that's an interesting outfit to ski in. This picture is at about 10,500 feet, right below the Pearly Gates, just about 500 feet below the summit of Mount Hood. Very high up on the mountain. And this person is about to ski down, and you can probably imagine, a margin of safety is lower than what I would like. But this is a pretty amazing feat of athleticism. So this guy set the FKT for Mount Hood skiing, fastest known time. Hour and 31 minutes from car to car, summit and back. Since then, somebody's beat this by running, not with skis. He still has his FKT with skis, but the running FKT is an hour and 16 minutes. It's amazing. And this has really happened before the pandemic, but it really started flourishing in the pandemic because there weren't ultra runs, there weren't marathons, you couldn't compete. So people competed by trying to do FKTs. So one of the most impressive FKTs was the Infinity Loop on Rainier, the women's Infinity Loop unsupported on Rainier. So if you're not familiar with the Infinity Loop, it's a thing. You start at Paradise at 4,000 feet. You climb to the summit of Rainier at 14,400. So 10,000 feet, you climb to the summit. You go down the other side. You run around the half of the Wonderland Trail back to your car, 50 miles. You climb back up to the summit of Mount Rainier, go back down the other side, and run the other half of the Wonderland Trail. the infinity loop. So 3 women did it in 2023, and it was 3 days, 22 hours. And there's a men's record. There's a double infinity loop FKT. There's a Wonderland 93-mile run FKT. There's a double Wonderland FKT. So this is how some people are interacting with the wilderness nowadays. It's different, right? So the other thing is social media. So social media is good and bad. Like, I love getting updates from the climbing ranger. Ryan Matz is the climbing ranger in Mount Hood. He'll post a social media update, and he'll give objective data. So he'll say, the fumarole is open. And Portland Mountain Rescue, our colleagues in the city, have a robust, fabulous social media climbing report program. It's fabulous to get information, because when I first climbed Mount Hood in 1994, my brother and I had to call Zigzag Ranger Station, try to get a hold of a climbing ranger who maybe not had been on the mountain recently, or maybe not had even been in the office, try to get some information. But now you can get all kinds of information about climbing. But if you're a novice climber and you read this post and you think it's okay to climb Mount Hood in running shoes and microspikes, that's maybe a problem. And you have to understand, Mount Hood has holes on it. It has fumaroles, glide cracks, crevasses, and bergschrunds. And you kind of need to know what those things are and how they're different to manage a successful climb. So the interesting thing about the Crag Rat archives is that this isn't necessarily a new behavior of humans. So in 1956, there's a guy who wrote in the climbing register, "I climbed Mount Hood without crampons to prove it could be done." And then somebody wrote a letter to the Oregonian, or the Daily Oregonian, and said, it's irresponsible that this person wrote this in the climbing register. Then somebody else wrote a letter to the Oregonian that said, well, it was done, so it's good we knew about it. And then somebody else wrote a letter to the editor that said, well, I saw for a fact he was guided and had a rope attached to him. So you get the idea. This banter back and forth happened back then. It was just took days and days and days because it was in the newspaper. And it wasn't instantaneous. Like, you can be on the summit and post this picture, right? So social media changes the way things happen. We do go after a fair number of trauma patients, and I don't necessarily know if it's getting worse, but it seems like it is. And I don't know if it's the Red Bull Strava culture of people trying to push the limits of human interaction with the world, or I don't know if it's just we have more people and so we have more trauma, but we have a fair number of trauma patients that are injured significantly. So I'm not exactly sure where we'll be in 100 years. I hope we maintain some traditions. I hope we keep calling our president the Big Squeak and our secretary the Pipsqueak. Some traditions we absolutely had to get rid of and have to. It wasn't until 1990 that we let our first women join as rescue members. And we have one of the most skilled rescue mountaineers on our team, triple-digit summits of Rainier, 7 summits of Denali as a guide, been on Everest almost to the summit, but didn't summit because she rescued a client. Like, incredibly solid rescue mountaineer. And we have another person who was in the first cohort in 1990 who was voted in and still is active today, Beth Hukari. So there's some traditions I'm a little bit ambivalent about. The itchy wool. So for our 100th, one of our guys, Gary Soleil, a solid rescuer, started thinking about this problem. It's hard to find them, can't wash them, the shirts. So he asked a company, a local company, kind of local, Flylow, he said, can you maybe build us a shirt? And so Gary had Flylow build a shirt, and he built us a 100th anniversary shirt, and it's tech flannel. So it's polyester, and I can wash it. Thanks for listening.
You look good. The double look. I like that. Okay, this is your guys' chance if you have questions, and I hope you do, that you can ask them of Christopher. Yes, sir.
Chris, thanks so much for the talk. I have a question about the earth warming with climate change. So as the glaciers are receding, do you project any trends in the changes of the types of rescues or the proportions that you guys will be making?
Yeah, great question, Nick. We've already seen, and I talk about this a little bit in my book. We've already seen changes on how we've had to do rescues. For example, simply the approach up the Eliot Glacier is markedly different from where it used to be. It used to be the Eliot Glacier was snow pretty much all the way from cloud cap, and you could throw on skis and get up high in the alpine quickly on a rescue. Now it's a big problem. We got to toil over these big boulders because the glaciers receded so much, and the glaciers actually shrunk in depth also. And so approaches are more difficult. There's rockfall where there typically isn't rockfall because the snow and the ice is kind of the glue that holds this crummy basalt and andesite volcanic rock onto the volcano. You know, when it melts, there's a lot more rockfall than there used to be. And so, yeah, it changes the terrain mostly on how we do rescues. And bringing people out off the Mount Hood, if we don't have snow or glaciers, it's so incredibly difficult to bring somebody across those lava fields. Like, it's dangerous, and it's just really hard.
Thank you. Okay. Well, you guys think of questions. I want to put in a plug that if anyone knows a glaciologist, that's a topic I want to hear more about.
Chris, I think there's a perception that when things go south, when they go bad, help is just a phone call away. How long does it take a normal response, and how long does it take to bring in a helicopter response?
Francois, fabulous question. Thanks for asking. When people call 911 and the sheriff department, fortunately nowadays we can almost always get cell phone coordinates. They're not always accurate. It depends on how the cell phone coordinates come in. But when that call comes in, the Crag Rats have a very fast response. So we can pretty much, it takes dispatch 15, 20 minutes to figure out what's going on. We can usually deploy in 15 minutes, but it's gonna be an hour to get up to the mountain to where we're gonna park. And then it's gonna be, if it's on the south side, we might be able to get a bump up on the chairlifts. We might be able to get a snowcat ride. If it's on the north side, we gotta get a snowcat to get up high on the mountain. So everything takes hours. Unless we're already on the mountain, which happens somewhat regularly. It happened to us just a couple weeks ago, but if we're already on the mountain, we get the call, but it takes a long time, hours.
Okay, questions? Yes, sir, and then I'll get you, okay?
I'm curious if you guys were involved in the helicopter rollover incident on
Yeah,
Hood.
in
Did you have to self-rescue members?
Yeah, in 2002.
Yeah.
Yeah, so if you're not familiar with that mission, there was a climbing party of 3 people that fell roped together using an unanchored rope. They fell and ran into 2 more groups of 3. So there were 3 dead and 6 injured, and they were hoisting. They had to deal with at least the 3 people that were alive first. And as they were hoisting them with a Air Force Pave Hawk. They did the first hoist with a Army Black Hawk, which is considerably lighter than a Pave Hawk, and when they were hoisting with a Pave Hawk, it tumbled down. It lost its lift and crashed on the mountain. So nobody was injured on that Pave Hawk, or nobody died on the Pave Hawk. And the Crag Rats deployed. I was actually with 2 Crag Rats climbing Diamond Peak at the time, so we heard about it but couldn't respond. But we sent a couple people, and I don't remember exactly who, but mostly that mission was done by our colleagues in Portland Mountain Rescue.
Thank you. Did you have something, Michael?
Thanks. Yeah, I was also going to ask about that event, but I guess a follow-on to both of those questions with people having, GPS devices and having the Garmin insurance. Do you feel like people are maybe more casual, less prepared to travel into the alpine country and just relying on if a rescue being available when they get in above their heads? Seems like that's happening more and more.
Thank you.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, we've got good scientific data that says the more safety equipment you have, the more risk tolerance you have. And that goes with seatbelts and helmets and avalanche transceivers. So yeah, I think if people know they can instantly get a hold of 911 dispatch, most people probably take a little more risks than they might not. And nowadays, if you have a new enough cell phone that is satellite messaging capable, you can text Hood River Dispatch with satellite reception, not if you don't have phone reception. So I think probably people take more risk. We actually go a couple times a year. It seems like we go on a false alarm too. Somebody accidentally deploys their emergency locator. We wake somebody up at 2 a.m. in their tent, and they're like, "What are you guys doing?" And and we're like, "Your locator's going off," and he's
don't
like,
wanna be that
"Oh, you're
person."
right, it is."
Oh my God.
I was just wondering how many rescues you guys have done this year so far.
7 or 8. Cully, do you know how many we've done? 7 or 8? 5 or 6. Yeah, but a couple big missions in the Alpine. Complicated, big missions, people hurt on snow, in storms, poor visibility. But yeah, that sounds about right, 5 or 6.
Is the percentage of rescues still predominantly folks from outside the gorge as opposed to folks from the gorge?
Yeah, Matt English, our sheriff, I think just sort of tallied things, and I think probably 60-70% are non-Hood River County residents that get injured.
And the funding is what?
So the sheriff department has county tax dollars to pay for the entire search and rescue program, not necessarily all of the Crag Rats, but the Crag Rats are funded with a small part of money from the sheriff office. We rely heavily on donations. We have a hut that we rent out, so we get income from our hut rental business, and we pay for a lot of stuff on our own, our fuel and our climbing harness and
Shirts.
our carabiners. So a combination.
Shirts you pay for.
We buy the shirts, yes.
Yeah. Taking donations.
Not these.
Okay.
Not these.
Okay. All right. Any last questions? Thank you.
Along that same line, in Colorado, if you have a fishing license, part of what you pay for a fishing license goes toward rescues. Is there not something like this in Oregon?
Yeah, so the Colorado SAR card program is incredibly successful, and I believe there is a SAR card program that's going to start in Hood River, but a small portion of the fishing licenses go towards the marine rescue, which Hood River County gets some of for the Columbia River. A part of hunting license goes to ATV licenses go to SAR, but I think we will have a volunteer SAR card program in the next couple of years in Oregon because it's so successful.
Christopher's going to be out with his books in a second. But I wanted to, well, first of all, for folks here who are excited and think, oh, I would like to apply to maybe be a Crag Rat, or I would alternatively like to just give you money. One's easier than the other. Maybe just give them a little quick heads up on how that works.
Donations, you can go to our website, cragrats.org, and there's a QR code, or there's a little click to pay, and we do appreciate donations. We put it directly into our search and rescue program. To be a Crag Rat is really, really hard. I mean, I kind of explained to you what we are looking for in alpinists, and usually what our program is, if somebody approaches one of us with interest, we bring them to some social functions, some trainings, kind of get to know them. They get to know us. I guess it's kind of like online dating, but it's in real life. And once we figure out that, yeah, this is a good match for us, then we sort of start the process of which is about a 2-year prospective member.
Yep. Okay. So I usually do a last question. I'm not going to give you the same one. I think I'm going to give you the hard one.
Oh, boy.
Which this one is, if you were any mountain in the world, what mountain would you be and why? Okay, so you're going to think on that. Okay? We're wrapping up the season with this comment, so I don't want to tell you that the stakes are high, but they're pretty high, okay? Okay, while Christopher thinks on that, I want to quickly do a couple final things for us, which is we find speakers and topics in 2 main ways. One of them is we're seeking people out because not everyone knows about this program, or there's topics that I know people want to hear about, and so I go and find experts. The other way that we find people is we have an RFP process, and you can send in a proposal. We have that online right now until May 15th. And we're looking for folks who have unique knowledge of the cultural and natural history of the gorge. And this is a really educational program, so not activism or advocacy or selling your program, but really educating us about this place in ways we might not already know. So that's online. I want to let you know we have a special pop-up event next week on Friday the 24th at the Bingen Theater. This is, if you're a nerd like me, if you listen to Timber Wars and OPB, if you've been around at all, you may recall the Gang of Four, and one of those people who helped Gore and Clinton and the Pacific Northwest, and honestly our whole country, understand forests and how to manage them is Jerry Franklin. And Jerry Franklin is now in his 80s, and he's going to take a look back at his career and a look forward at what the future of forestry holds for us. It's a real privilege that we're going to get to hear from him in person, and that's next Friday. Those tickets are going fast, so I hope you can join us, but get your tickets soon. I also wanted to let you know, you may have seen we've got some posters outside that show the progression of the last handful of years of Sense of Place. And I get to announce tonight, a little bit early, tomorrow morning the news will come out. I don't know if any of you guys went to the Watershed Rock Opera or you heard of the Watershed Rock Opera, but that was a wild multimedia event that 20 local performers and musicians and storytellers produced as part of the 15th season of Sense of Place last season. We actually followed the watershed from the sky down the mountain out to the river. And that project celebrated our 15th anniversary, and tomorrow it will be announced that it's being awarded an Oregon Heritage Award of Excellence, which is really special to me. What I particularly love about that is that the whole state will know what we are capable of here in the gorge and the kind of stories that make up this place and the kind of people that we have here. So it's a very great celebration for us. And if those kinds of things and this sort of thing tonight and Jerry Franklin next week are things you value, the Catalyst Fund is a way to help us make this transition from being a program of other nonprofits to becoming our own nonprofit. As some of you may know, Mount Adams Institute is dissolving as a result of federal cuts and some other real hardship. And so we are now setting sail after 16 years and becoming our own nonprofit, which I'm really excited about. And then I wanted to have anyone in this audience, and fortunately those of you who wore your shirts are very easy to see. If you are a Crag Rat, past or present, which it sounds like everyone is present once you're in, will you please stand up so we can see you and celebrate you? Thank you, guys. And I want to also thank the family members who put up with people getting up in the middle of the night and heading out. If you appreciate the story tonight, you can hear more sense of place type stories, including the one about the Crag Rats on Here in the Gorge, which is our podcast. You can get that and take it with you anywhere. The story with Cole, once I heard the story from Tom, I needed to figure out how to get a hold of Cole's father. They're not from the Gorge. And so I, with some help, sleuthed around online and figured out where they lived and their address and their past 5 houses and their phone number. Just producers are sort of stocky like that. And then I sat on it because I was really nervous to call these people and ask them about what was probably one of the worst days of their lives. I was really worried that they would get really mad at me. And so on Monday, I thought, well, I shouldn't call them on a Monday because that's the start of the week and people are getting going and I don't want to interrupt their week beginning, and so I'll wait. And on Tuesday, I was like, well, I've got work stuff today, so maybe I'll wait. And Wednesday, I probably shouldn't do it. And by the time I got to Friday, my husband said, have you called them? And I said, well, it's Friday, and people are winding down, and they leave work early, and I don't want to call them. And he's like, is that really the reason? And I knew he was right, and so I picked up the phone, and I called him, and Cole's mom answered. I knew it was his mom because I knew her name and stalked her online. So she answered, and I started into the preamble, which many a producer has done, and it's always awkward, where you're trying to quickly say who you are and why you're calling, but they're not really listening that well, and there's a lot coming out. And I got to the end of my preamble, and I said, and I want to do this because I'm working on a podcast episode about the Crag Rats. And she stops me and she goes, who we love. Man. And that went on to become a very meaningful episode and interview. And as some of you guys may know, the Crag Rats very frequently don't know what happens to the people they rescue for HIPAA rules and other reasons. But in the case of Cole, we do know. And a few years after, Richard Hallman, who's here, and Tom Rousseau went and rescued Cole from the side of the mountain, from his first camping trip with his dad. I got a call from Kim, his dad, and he said, Cole has made Eagle Scout. Cole survived. He made Eagle Scout, and they have family in Portland and family in Tri-Cities, but they wanted to come to Hood River, where everyone, including the Crag Rats, could join the celebration for Cole's Eagle Scout ceremony. And so they came to Hood River, and I called Tom, and I called Richard, and for the first time since they helped get him off the mountain and into the hospital, Cole and Richard and Tom and Kim were all able to meet. Oh. I remember asking Richard when I interviewed him, it was the first time I met him, and near the end I said, I asked, well, what will we do, what would the world be like if we didn't have any Crag Rats? And Richard, I think trying not to offend me, but sort of being annoyed with my question, looked at me and he said, well, there will always be Crag Rats, so. All right. If Christopher Van Tilburg was a mountain in the world, what mountain would you be and why?
I think I would probably be Broken Top. Because
Okay.
there's a really tight-knit family there. 3 sisters, Mount Bachelor. But Broken Top is very independent from that group.
Uh-huh.
And I haven't been to the top yet.
Oh, wow, okay. Now we got this is your bucket list now.
I guess so.
Okay. Thank you all for season 16. Thank you, sponsors and audience. We will see you next season. You can go see Christopher out in the lobby. Thank you so much. any door you want, or you can.
Okay,
stay
I'll
in
come
here.
get the
Yeah.
stuff later.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
We won't take it.
All right.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
Yeah. Hi.